He burst through the revolving doors of Bryant Park just as a blast of sleet hit his face, his courier bag slamming against his side. The December wind roared like an angry crowd, but Jack Donovan pressed on every muscle primed to outrun the cold and the clock. His mind raced ahead to his daughter Lily's dinner waiting back in the Bronx, her soft apology ringing in his ears whenever he was late. Yet as he rounded the lamppost near Fifth Avenue, the usual tunnel vision shattered. A group of tourists, lost panicked voices clashing in half-remembered phrases, had become a whirlpool of confusion. Instinct and long-dormant lessons kicked in. Jack paused, scanned the faces, and spoke into the storm. In a heartbeat, the chaos stilled. If you've ever believed in the power of quiet heroes and second chances, hit subscribe and drop a comment. What moment kept you going when it seemed all was lost? Stay tuned for part 1. Jack Donovan tugged the strap of his courier bag higher on his shoulder as he plunged into the frigid rush of Midtown Manhattan. City lights blurred through the whipping sleet, and every footstep splashed through puddles that reflected the dull gray sky. The air stung his cheeks, and his breath came in cold bursts as he navigated throngs of holiday shoppers hunched beneath umbrellas and runners scurrying with head-down determination. He checked his watch, 4:12 p.m. If he didn't hustle now, he'd miss the last train home to the Bronx and his daughter Lily's dinner. She'd promised to wait, but the years had taught Jack to expect disappointment. He veered onto West 42nd Street, weaving past delivery trucks and yellow cabs, honking obstacles clear. Each block felt stretched gravity heavier in the fading daylight. Red and green storefronts glittered with faux warmth, yet Jack felt none of it. Instead, he shouldered through the crowd with practiced ease, an uncelebrated rhythm of city life pickup, drop-off, sprint, breathe, repeat. As he approached Bryant Park, the sleet narrowed to a fine spray, and the tall lampposts lining the walkways glowed ghostly in the gloom. Normally, he'd skirt the park's edges, cutting inside only if traffic snarled. Today, he'd chosen the straight path even as dusk deepened. That's when he heard the first sharp cry. He paused. Instincts bristling voices, he couldn't place an undercurrent of urgency that felt wrong. Ahead, under the glow of an ornate lamp, a cluster of tourists stood huddled, a woman's stroller, abandoned maps flapping in gloved hands, a tour guide's useless placard taped to a stick. Jack slowed, hand still on the bag strap. He'd seen lost travelers before, but never like this. They spoke in bursts, German, shouted by one man, Mandarin by another, Spanish by a frantic woman. Phones pressed to ears offered no solace. Their panic was a living thing, a tangled mesh of fear and frustration. Jack's heart tightened for a moment. He saw Lily's anxious face when he arrived late. Then something clicked. He remembered the lessons from his old life, the languages he'd once studied before life upended everything. He stepped forward into the circle. The wind shifted, slicing past him, but he stood unmoved. Clearing his throat, Jack looked to the pair of elderly tourists arguing in broken English. Permiso, he offered, gently switching to Spanish as the women turned toward him. Their eyes widened, hope flickering like a candle. Moments later, he'd moved through German and then Mandarin, each syllable measured respectful guiding. Within minutes, the group's tension unraveled. A child tugged at his coat, eyes bright. A mother sobbed quietly, clutching her map as Jack drew a simple grid on its backside, 4 languages neatly labeled. Tourists dialed hotels with his help. Elderly couples embraced relief. Jack exhaled the city noise rushing back in. The storm of confusion had been broken by words, his words prompted by a moment's empathy. As the last of the group dispersed toward Fifth Avenue, Jack checked his watch again, 4:27 p.m. Rush hour traffic would strangle his route if he dawdled. He squared his shoulders, hoisted his bag, and strode on the sleet, swirling around him as if in applause. Eden Avenues stood waiting 2 more blocks and a train station, but Jack's mind had already shifted back to Lily and her patient smile. Tonight she'd forgive him again. But now Jack carried something more, the knowledge that kindness spoken in the right language at the right moment could carve a path through any storm. And when he finally dashed into the cavernous subway station at 4:45 and squeezed onto the last train bound for the Bronx, he did so with a quieter, steadier heartbeat, confident that he'd done what mattered most. By the time Jack rounded the corner onto the broad promenade of Bryant Park, the wind had grown into a howl, whipping umbrellas inside out, and sending discarded wrappers skittering across the pavement. Street lamps flickered in the early dusk, casting halos of yellow light through the sleet. A few hardy revelers still milled near the holiday market booths, but most New Yorkers had already retreated indoors, leaving the park center eerily still until the sudden clamor erupted near the Fifth Avenue entrance. Around a tall wrought iron lamppost, a dozen tourists clustered in disarray, their brightly colored winter coats huddled together like a flock of startled birds. Paper maps flashed in the air, flapping as if trying to escape their owner's grasp. Smartphones hovered at arm's length, screens glowing with indecipherable directions. A young guide in a sky blue jacket stood at the center, his placard swinging uselessly at his side, NYC Walking Tour. Multilingual available, but his eyes were wide with panic, his breath fogging in the cold as he attempted to calm the growing uproar. Entschuldigung. Können Sie mir helfen? Called an elderly man in a thick German accent, his gloved hands trembling as he pointed down the avenue. His companion, another man perhaps 5 years his senior, responded in rapid Mandarin confusion, creasing his brow as he tried to reconcile the foreign syllables. Niehu, shouted a young woman, clutching her soaked guidebook. No entiendo nada. Nearby, a mother clutched a stroller so tightly her knuckles whitened. Inside, a toddler burrowed beneath a lavender blanket, cheeks flushed from the cold. Tears welled in the mother's eyes as she muttered soothing words in French, her accent betraying more fear than comfort. A scarf-clad teenager snapped a selfie, attempting to capture the moment, only to look up in alarm when dozens of disparate voices collided. "What is happening?" she mouthed to her friend, the hiccup of panic bristling at her voice. The guide raised his hands and spoke English voice, urgent but cracking. "Please, everyone, please calm down. Follow me south to the ice rink. That will get us back on Fifth." But his words seemed to fall into a void. Some tourists clapped their hands over their ears. Others shouted back in Japanese or Portuguese, each newcomer adding to the cacophony. A cluster of Spanish-speaking visitors erupted into a heated debate over which direction to turn. One woman gripped a crumpled pamphlet for their hotel eyes, darting from map to map, wishing for someone who shared her language. Another man in his 30s paced in circles, hands buried in his pockets, stammering fragments of Italian. In that moment, Bryant Park felt less like an urban oasis and more like a battlefield of confusion. The sleet stung exposed faces, the bitter wind carried shattered hopes of a peaceful stroll, and the guide's calm facade cracked under the pressure. He glanced at his watch, 15 p.m., then at the looming buildings around them as if searching for escape routes. Pedestrians nearby skirted the scene with polite distance, crossing the lawn to avoid the tambourine of complaints. A couple reading paper cups snapped photos from a safe distance, live streaming the spectacle with breathless commentary. A security officer emerged from behind a food kiosk, his flashlight beam bouncing off the wet stone. He approached with cautious authority. "Excuse me, folks, can I help?" he called, voice almost lost amid the babel of tongues. The crowd only parted enough to stare suspicion flickering in their eyes as they tried to frame his uniform with any language they knew. A gust of wind tore 2 pages from a guide's laminated leaflet, sending them swirling like ghostly snowflakes across the pavement. People lunged to catch them, only to misinterpret the flapping rectangles as signals of danger. The guide turned in circles, chest-heaving sweat beading at his hairline despite the cold. He tapped the back of his jacket where his company logo should have inspired trust, but the terror in the group refused to diminish. Near the edge of the fountain, a young couple huddled beneath a shared umbrella, their voices low and tense. "Should we call the hotel?" the woman whispered in English. The man shook his head, fumbling for a charger cable. "No signal," he muttered. "Nothing works in this park." An elderly woman, her white hair escaping a knitted cap, clasped a camera to her chest. She blinked back tears. "In my town, people help each other," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Here, I don't know anymore." A teenage boy, cheeks pink from the cold, hugged his mother's arm and whispered in Korean. His mother patted his hand, but her eyes darted toward every passing stranger, praying someone would rescue them from this confusion. Behind the group, the glass towers of Midtown rose like silent judges, their windows reflecting a fractured tableau of fear. The contrast between corporate calm and human chaos felt brutal inside those towers. Decisions were made with precision, with strategy, with confidence. Out here, raw panic reigned unchecked by protocols or security protocols. The lamppost, once a beacon of light, now stood at the epicenter of disarray. The guide cleared his throat and raised his voice. Por favor, todos juntos, he began in Spanish, then switched mid-sentence to French, pleading for unity. It was a valiant effort, but the group's nerves were unstrung and no single language could soothe all the wounds. A cyclist approached Bell, ringing, and nearly collided with an elderly man brandishing a smartphone. Both skidded to a stop, curses in Polish and Arabic erupting as they tried to right themselves. A toddler in a stroller shrieked with fright, and the mother lunged forward, rescuing her child from imaginary peril. At the core of this human tempest, the blue-jacketed guide finally dropped his sign and placed both hands on his head. He muttered an apology in English, then in Chinese, then in Portuguese, each rendering more desperate than the last. Yet the people around him only grew more frantic, more adrift. Time blurred. The streetlights blinked awake, and sleet became a fine chatter against the pavement. Frost formed on leather coats and silk scarves alike. Everyone had forgotten that they were in one of the world's most visited cities, so busy capturing moments on cameras they couldn't truly experience them. Lost in translation, they teetered on the edge of helplessness. In the space between collisions of sound, Jack Donovan stood just beyond the periphery courier bag, half unzipped. He watched the storm of confusion lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced back toward Fifth Avenue, a map of subway lines etched in his mind, but something stopped him, the raw ache of fear in a child's eyes, the frailty in an older couple's stance, the guide's resigned despair. Jack pulled his scarf tighter, shoulders braced against the wind. With one last look at the swirling crowd, he stepped forward, ready to speak the words they needed, even if he spoke them in 8 different languages. And in that charged moment, as the sleet continued to fall and the city seemed to hold its breath, Jack Donovan became the calm before the storm. Jack stopped a few paces from the lamppost, the rushing wind and sleet muted in his ears the moment he committed to help. He tugged his courier bag higher on his shoulder, drew in a steady breath, and waded into the circle of confusion. The elderly couple stood spine straight, their faces pinched with cold and worry. Jack offered a gentle nod, then spoke in warm, measured Spanish. Señores, quieren mi ayuda. ¿A dónde necesitan llegar? The grandmother blinked her eyes, filling with relief as she recognized the familiar cadence. She clutched her husband's arm, then pointed shakily toward Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street. Jack smiled and repeated the direction: sigan por esa avenida 2 cuadras hacia el norte, luego giren a la derecha. Encontrarán la entrada del metro justo allí. He spoke slowly, enunciating every syllable so they could follow. The couple let out simultaneous gracias, their shoulders relaxing for the first time. On Jack's right, the man who had shouted in German tapped his foot anxiously. Jack turned to him and switched seamlessly, Entschuldigen, Sie mein Freund. Wo müssen Sie hinlaufen? The man's brow furrowed, then lifted as comprehension bloomed. He pointed down the park path. Jack offered a reassuring pat on the arm and repeated the instructions in German, softening his tone. Gehen Sie geradeaus, 2 Blöcke weiter, dann links. Die U-Bahn-Station ist gut ausgeschildert. The man exhaled audibly, then offered Jack a shaky thumbs up before heading off in the correct direction. A young tourist in a wool hat, overhearing Jack's German, leaned forward and asked a question in Mandarin. Jack pivoted again. Qingwen Nanyao Chunali. His Mandarin was deliberate, each character's pronunciation rounded with respect. The woman's eyes sparkled as she realized she could communicate. She asked for her hotel's name in Mandarin. Jack answered carefully and watched as her frown smoothed into a grateful smile. Meanwhile, the guide in the blue jacket attempted to regain control, but his stuttering English only added to the mayhem. Tourists from Portugal, Italy, and Japan all clamored for help. Jack's lips curved in a sympathetic half-smile. He reached into his pocket, extracted a pen and the battered tourist flyer he found at the cafe earlier, now damp, and corners curling, and sketched a simple map. He labeled each street in English and Spanish, then added German labels on the map's edge, followed by Chinese characters along the bottom. As he drew, he murmured directions in rapid succession. Spanish, German, Mandarin, each phrase a lifeline thrown to a flailing swimmer. A child no older than 6 tugged on his sleeve and whispered in English, "How do you speak all those languages?" Jack crouched so his eyes met hers. "A little bit of study, a lot of practice, and a lot of heart," he said gently. The child's eyes grew wide. "You're like a wizard," she declared with glee. Jack ruffled her hair and stood offering a small bow that sent laughter rippling through the group. In the space of 5 intense minutes, the tide had turned. Panic dissolved into cautious hope. A pair of tourists who had nearly collided in frustration now exchanged friendly directions thanks to Jack's translations. The guide's signboard, once mocked as a cruel joke, now read like a tribute to Jack's skill: NYC Walking Tour Multilingual Miracle on Demand. A teenage couple huddled under an umbrella approached Jack asking for a recommendation on local cuisine. He described a nearby deli. It's famous for its matzo ball soup and knishes. Ask for it in Yiddish, mazlakish. They broke into delighted smiles and seemed almost eager to follow his advice rather than running back to their hotel. Even the security officer who had paused on the outskirts stepped forward and saluted Jack with a nod of respect. "Thanks, man," he said. "You saved a lot of trouble." Jack waved him off with a grin. There was no time for accolades. The work was nearly done. With the last of the tourists pointed down the correct paths, Jack took a moment to survey the aftermath. The group had dispersed in pairs and small clusters, all now moving with purpose instead of panic. Bags were hoisted, maps folded neatly, and smartphones tucked away as the travelers followed the well-labeled routes. Everywhere Jack looked, he saw relief blossoming on faces once clouded with anxiety. He let the breeze wash over him, tasting snowflakes on his tongue, and felt the familiar throb of adrenaline fading into calm. In that moment, Jack Donovan Currier, single dad Bronx native, felt something he hadn't admitted in years: the quiet satisfaction of making a real difference. A woman in a navy wool coat lingered near the lamppost, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the park lights like dark mirrors. Jack recognized her now as the tall observer from earlier. She took a single step forward, eyes bright behind tinted lenses. "That was remarkable," she said in flawless English, her voice calm but ringing with genuine admiration. Jack bristled at the compliment, shrugging as if to say he'd done nothing special. "I just happen to know a few words," he muttered. She shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "Most people barely know one language. You spoke 8. You didn't just help them, you gave them back their dignity." She extended a thin-gloved hand. Jack hesitated, then took it. Strength met warmth in her grip. The sleet had slowed to a soft dusting, and the park seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, as if the world itself recognized the moment's significance. Jack found himself at a crossroads, the thrum of the city beyond the park gates where his next package delivery waited, and the unexpected invitation before him from this elegant stranger. Yet in that fleeting handshake, Jack realized that this ripple of kindness would carry him far beyond his usual route. As the final tourist waved a grateful farewell and vanished into the city's pulse, Jack Donovan felt the storm of confusion transform into a breeze of opportunity. No wizard's hat or magic wand, just words spoken when they were needed most. And as the woman watched him unseen by most, but seen in that moment, Jack understood that sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we simply step forward and speak. Samantha Blake remained perfectly still at the edge of the park walkway, her posture the very definition of composed authority. The hem of her navy wool coat, tailored to skim her calves, swished against the slush as she shifted her weight from one stiletto heel to the other. Through oversized sunglasses, she watched Jack Donovan move among the disoriented tourists, his every gesture measured, unhurried. He spoke languages like turning a key in a lock: Spanish, German, Mandarin, freeing the trapped voices of men and women who had thought themselves forever stranded. She inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs with the raw electricity of Manhattan in winter. Around her, Bryant Park's festival lights glowed through the haze, a promise of holiday cheer. Beneath her feet, the cobblestones were slick with sleet that had turned to ice. She had come here on a whim, escaping the suffocating calm of her high-rise office, where numbers ruled and human nuance was often an afterthought. But what she had witnessed tonight felt more strategic than any boardroom play, the way Jack glanced toward the elderly couple to gauge their understanding, the gentleness in his voice when translating for the flustered guide, the surprising ease with which he bridged cultural chasms. She adjusted the bag slung over her shoulder, grateful for its warmth. Beneath her coat, she wore a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, clothes chosen carefully. No lipstick smudges, no hair out of place. As CEO of Morrow Global Technologies, she spent her days choreographing mergers, realigning brand identities, negotiating billions in investment capital. She stood on the shoulders of diplomats and financiers, an heir to ambition as much as to legacy. Her father had taught her that efficiency was the highest form of power. Yet here in this collision of languages and raw human need, she felt the limits of strategy crack open. Her assistant's voice buzzed in her earpiece. "Ma'am, the board is asking for your presence on the conference call in 10 minutes. They need updates on the Southeast Asia merger." Samantha pressed a finger to the earpiece, forcing herself to breathe through the sudden tension. "Tell them I'll join in a moment," she said, voice controlled but soft enough not to startle Jack from his task. The assistant hesitated, then fell silent. Samantha closed her eyes briefly, letting the park's hush settle around her before reopening them. Jack released the last of the tourists with a final nod, then paused at the edge of the clearing, hands tucked into his coat pockets. He surveyed the park as though waiting for someone or something to acknowledge his work. Samantha saw the tension in his shoulders ease the same way her own had during her first billion-dollar deal when the ink finally dried on the dotted line, a heady mix of exhaustion and triumph. She stepped forward, her coat swishing softly, and the click of her heels underscored each footfall like a metronome. She waited until Jack's gaze lifted to meet hers, then offered a smile so slight most would have missed it. Jack froze, then blinked and gave a polite nod. The tourists, now dispersed, faded into the park's perimeter. A security guard approached Jack with a puzzled expression, but Jack waved him off, following Samantha's gaze instead of retreating. Unaccustomed, though she was to commanding attention outside of her corporate sphere, Samantha realized how easily he deferred to her presence, an instinct cultivated in high-stakes environments where recognizing authority, spoken or unspoken, could mean the difference between success and failure. "Remarkable," she said, her voice low, yet carrying easily across the short distance. Jack's jaw tightened slightly, humility flashing in his eyes. "I just spoke the words they needed," he replied. His tone was modest, almost apologetic, another contrast to the bluster of boardroom bravado she knew so well. She studied him, the cropped haircut that spoke of no-nonsense practicality, the creases at his eyes that hinted at laughter lines rather than lines of command. His delivery bag hung at an angle across his torso, the logo faded from months of wear. She wondered how many packages he'd carried that day, how many steps he'd taken, how many small moments he'd traded for the larger ones she orchestrated by phone and email. He was a man rooted in action, not strategy, in service, not status. She reached up and removed her sunglasses, tucking them into the lapel of her coat. The gathering dusk sharpened the angles of her face, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of rain-soaked slate. She watched Jack press a business card into his coat pocket, then turned to leave, slipping back into the city's pulse without a backward glance. Samantha realized that she'd understood nothing of efficiency until she'd seen simple kindness ripple through that crowd. Tonight, Jack had turned confusion into clarity faster than any algorithm or business process she'd ever devised. A sudden crackle in her earpiece jolted her back to her executive life. "Ma'am, they're waiting." She pressed a finger to her lips as an apology, then straightened her shoulders. Jack paused mid-step and looked back, eyebrows raised in quiet question. She offered him a polite nod, an unspoken promise that their paths would cross again, and then released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said. Her voice held a sincerity that surprised her. Jack inclined his head. "Just doing what I can," he said, words that echoed more than strategy ever could. Samantha watched him disappear into the swirling sleet and the blur of holiday lights, feeling the tingle of something she rarely named humility. In boardrooms, you measured success in profit margins and market share. Real change, she now understood, thrived in simple human moments. With one last glance at the spot where Jack had stood, Samantha turned and stepped onto Fifth Avenue. The wind tugged her coat and tousled her hair as she hailed a black sedan waiting at the curb. The driver opened her door with seamless deference. Samantha slid inside the leather seat, cool against her coat. As the car pulled away, she pressed her palm to the glass eyes, following Jack's path until he slipped from view. In that silence between engine and exhaust, she felt a new strategy forming, a plan not built on spreadsheets, but on human connection. She tapped her tablet as the city lights blurred past. Already she drafted a note: find Jack Donovan, learn his background, speak to him about Translation Summit. It was a departure from her usual to-do lists. Tonight, the metrics she'd chase would be measured in lives touched, not dollars gained. Behind her, Bryant Park's lampposts flickered off one by one, leaving only the hum of distant traffic. Samantha closed her eyes, leaning back against the seat. The board's demands, the mergers, the investor calls, all waited in the building she'd soon return to. But for a few precious moments in the hush after the storm of confusion, she allowed herself to hope for something more: leadership infused with compassion, strategy guided by empathy, and the possibility that her own world, long ruled by deals and deadlines, might expand in ways she hadn't dared imagine. And in that soft exhale, Samantha Blake realized she would never command a room the same way again. Samantha Blake slipped out of her heels in the silent refuge of her Manhattan penthouse. The marble floors were cool beneath her wool-slippered feet. The city below pulsed with lights and distant sirens, but inside her high-ceilinged living room, a single monitor glowed against the shadowy walls. She crossed to the sleek glass desk where her assistant's tablet lay, blinking with notifications. Samantha drew a hand through her hair, loosening the immaculate chignon she'd worn all day. Tonight, she removed every professional veneer she could. She tapped the play icon on the security footage reel. The grainy video leapt to life, looping the moment she'd first spotted Jack Donovan among the tourists in Bryant Park. Over and over, she watched the delivery driver's head tilt the way his hand sketched that rough map on a damp paper flyer. Most striking of all was the patch of color on his courier bag, a child's rocket, hand-drawn and taped askew. Each replay revealed another subtle detail: the gentle arc of his smile as the small girl called him wizard, the way he bowed his head in quiet deference when the panicked couple offered thanks. Samantha pressed pause and leaned forward, fingers brushing the screen. Her reflection shimmered in the glass-sharp shoulders, a diamond pin at her lapel. The exacting precision of her tailor-made jacket. She smoothed the invisible crease between her brows. She had tracked boardroom betrayals, unmasked financial leaks, and negotiated millions in hostile takeovers. Yet here in the simplicity of human kindness, she felt strangely unmoored. Late-night rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the friendlier glow of holiday lights drifted in from the street below. Samantha stood and walked to the adjacent alcove where a wall-mounted console displayed floor plans, security logs, and personnel directories for Morrow Global Technologies. The building's HR database pulsed with every employee's record-hire date department review scores. None of it helped her understand Jack Donovan. He wasn't on the payroll. Courier Express was an entirely separate vendor, but that child's rocket M, she murmured to herself, was the clue. She returned to the monitor and keyed in a search for Courier Express in her building's visitor management system. A dozen driver badges scrolled by on the screen, each a year-old photo and name. Samantha's eyes narrowed as she scanned Michael Lee, Nia Johnson, Carlos Martinez. None matched the man with the rocket sticker. She paused at one entry: a J.D. Jack Donovan badge, ID 8297, checked in daily at 8 a.m. and out at 6:30 p.m. His last check-in this afternoon had been at 4:45 p.m., just after he'd cleared the tourists. A quiet thrill crept through her. Samantha tapped a few keys, bringing up Jack Donovan's basic profile: date of birth. Hire date, with Courier Express home branch in the Bronx. Curiously, there was a single note attached to his file: family sticker on bag rocket. Keep for ID. No other flags. No performance reviews. She let the data sink in. A courier whose only noteworthy trait in her system was the hand-drawn rocket, a child's touch on the monochrome rigors of corporate operations. She reached for her phone and scrolled to a saved contact: Clara, executive assistant. One tap brought up her messaging app. Samantha composed a brief directive: subject urgent. Matching ID 8297. Please locate Jack Donovan at Courier Express Bronx branch. Obtain full employment record shift schedule and any emergency contact details. Flag any mention of prior roles or education background. Discretion paramount. I need updates in 1 hour. She hesitated over the send button, recalling the polite nod Jack had given her as she left the park. Sending this message felt like summoning someone into her world, disrupting his routine. But she couldn't ignore the magnetism of that moment. His quiet competence had unsettled her, challenged the notion that power meant status. Tonight she followed her curiosity deeper. Her assistant's reply popped up almost instantly. Understood on it now. Expect dossier by 11:15 p.m. Samantha exhaled, feeling the weight of anticipation. She stood by the window sipping a warming swirl of chamomile tea and watched the taillights of a black sedan slip down the avenue. The scent of rain-washed pavement drifted up the glass, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender from her bedside diffuser. All her life she'd calculated risk and reward in boardrooms. Now she was charting the unknown territory of a single act of kindness. She reached back to the desk and opened a physical folder labeled Corporate Services Courier Express. Inside were contract notes, service-level agreements, and the occasional billing discrepancy flagged by her procurement team, never anything personal. She had authorized their vendor contract years ago, trusting them to keep her packages and confidential documents moving. Jack was simply one more face in a sea of delivery personnel. Until tonight. Her fingers brushed the edges of the folder and she allowed herself an uncharacteristic moment of doubt. What if he rebuffed her? What if he didn't want to leave his routine life for her corporate arena? Usually, she devised plan B, even plan C. None of that prepared her for genuine human unpredictability. Yet behind her, the board would not forgive endless delay. The Southeast Asia merger. The investor calls the quarterly numbers all demanded her attention at dawn. Still, Samantha Blake had never been more certain of anything she needed to meet this man again. The assistant's tablet buzzed on the desk, pulling her back. She glanced at the screen dossier compiling. Accessing academic records. ETA 45 minutes. She tapped a quick acknowledgement and stood. Panting slightly from the adrenaline of the chase, she walked to the coffee bar in the corner of her suite. She measured out 2 shots of espresso, her hand steady, then added hot water for an Americano. One for herself, one for the habit of preparation. Her gaze returned to the video footage looping on the monitor. Each replay drew her deeper into Jack's world, the way his hands curled around the pen as he wrote in Mandarin, the polite angle of his bow, the genuine warmth that softened the park's harsh edges. She realized that leadership was more than issuing memos and running projections. It was about presence, showing up when words mattered most, translating intention into action. A soft ping announced her assistant's arrival. She tapped the tablet, no dossier yet, but a cropped screenshot. Jack Donovan's smile as the tourist dispersed. Underneath, her assistant had scrawled a note, impressive clarity in every tongue. Possible previous academic background, Hunter College linguistics. Samantha's pulse quickened. Hunter College was renowned for its language programs. Was Jack a former professor who'd walked away from it all? She scrolled through the databases. Hunter didn't list dropouts by name, but she could request archived directories, alumni lists. With a few more queries, she might uncover his history. But first things first, she gathered her tool's phone tablet, the Americano, and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the East River. The winter air bit at her cheeks, and the steam curled from her cup like a promise. She closed her eyes, centering herself. In this moment, her penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a command center for something entirely new, a quest not for profit, but for connection. The first dossier entries would arrive soon. Samantha Blake, CEO of Morrow Global, would learn every bullet point of Jack Donovan's resume. But more importantly, she'd seek the story behind the bullet points, the motivations that led a man fluent in 8 languages to trade lectern for gloved hands in a delivery bag. In the hush between skyscrapers, she allowed herself to hope she'd discover not just a consultant, but a kindred spirit who might remind her what it meant to speak and to be heard again. Jack nudged open the glass door of the corner cafe, the jingle of the bell announcing his arrival. He shook the sleet from his parka and breathed in the warm, coffee-scented air. The Bronx morning crowd bustled around him, students in hoodies, retired couples nursing newspapers, a barista calling out drink orders in rapid Spanish. Jack wove through mismatched tables to his usual spot by the window, where a steaming Americano and a small oatmeal muffin waited, courtesy of Mrs. Harris next door. He sank onto the vinyl seat, unzipped his bag, and tapped his watch, 8:05 a.m. Plenty of time before his first drop-off. He took a thoughtful sip of coffee, letting the bitterness ground him when she appeared tall, composed, every inch the image of quiet power. Samantha Blake stepped into the cafe like she'd never known anything but command. Her hand closed around the door handle for a moment, as if gathering resolve, then she crossed the tile floor in heels that clicked softly, by his table. "Mr. Donovan?" She asked, her voice a calm contralto that cut through the cafe racket. Jack looked up, surprised. "Yes." He offered her a tentative nod. She gestured to the seat opposite him. "May I—" He said nothing, so she slid into the chair, setting a sleek tablet and leather portfolio on the table between them. Jack had expected follow-up questions about her security footage, perhaps a line of inquiry about his multilingual deafness. But Samantha didn't unfold a recorder or begin with credentials. Instead, she looked him in the eye, no sunglasses. Her hair pinched back in a loose chignon, and smiled with an openness that unsettled him. "I appreciate you meeting me," she began, unwrapping a latte and placing it in front of Jack with a warm smile. "This place makes the best coffee north of 149th Street. Jack blinked. "It's Mrs. Harris's doing." He sipped, then offered the latte to her. She declined, her eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. He cleared his throat. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Miss—" He paused for her name. "Blake," she supplied. "Samantha Blake." Jack nodded, shifting slightly. "You watched me help those tourists. I'm glad it was helpful." He tucked a loose curl behind his ear. Samantha lifted her tablet and tapped a few keys, turning the screen toward him. There, in crisp bullet points, was a summary of that afternoon's incident. Languages spoken, timestamps, on-the-spot map sketches, and the child's rocket sticker identified. "I tracked down your schedule," she said. "I saw you don't just deliver packages, you rescue strangers." She paused as Jack's eyebrows rose. "I have a summit next month, Global Partnerships Cross-Cultural Engagement. We need someone who doesn't just translate words, but translates intention. I'd like you to consult." The words hung between them like a question mark, waiting for conviction. Jack set down his coffee cup and eyed her. "Consult?" Howie asked. His voice was cautious, layered over a lifetime of second-guessing offers that sounded too good to be true. Samantha leaned forward, hands clasped. "On stage, backstage, wherever interpretation matters, simultaneous translation crisis communications will pay you, and I'd like you to help train our internal teams afterward. It's a short-term gig, a week, but it could turn into more." Jack glanced at the cardstock flyer Mrs. Harris had tucked into his bag that morning. Landmark Center, 3rd Avenue Summit. His chest tightened. "I have shifts," he said softly. "And Lily, my daughter needs me. School drop-offs, doctor's appointments." He trailed off, unsure how to explain that nights and weekend shifts paid the rent and kept her therapy appointments covered. Samantha's eyes softened. "I know enough about single parents to understand your priorities." She tapped the tablet again. "We can work around your schedule. Start every morning after your drop-off, finish before pickup. Walk-in sessions, remote follow-ups. No public announcement unless you want one." Her voice brimmed with an unexpected respect that made Jack sit up straighter. He took a deep breath and leaned back. Around them, the cafe's low chatter continued, friends laughing over mugs, baristas calling out names, the whir of the espresso machine. Jack traced the rim of his latte with a fingertip. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not bring in a professional conference interpreter?" He searched her face for any hint of strategy or pity. Samantha's smile deepened. "Because you don't just interpret language," she said. "You interpret people. The way you paused to read the emotions of that elderly couple, the way you bowed to speak to a Mandarin speaker as an equal, it wasn't show. It was genuine. I've seen board presentations and investor calls. I've never been moved the way I was watching you tonight." She tapped the tablet one last time, then slid it back into her portfolio. "I want authenticity, not another polished suit reading off a script." Jack absorbed her words, the implication of trust and belief in his abilities stirring something he hadn't felt in years. He thought of Lily and how her face lit up when he got home, her wonder at his small gestures. He thought of the months worrying over bills, balancing good deeds with necessities. "I need to talk it over with Lily," he said finally. Samantha nodded. "Of course," she replied gently. "And take your time. I can have my team reach out to coordinate the details." Jack looked at her for a long moment. The dawn light filtered through rain-slicked windows fell across her features, casting her in a soft glow. He realized that his world and hers, delivery routes and boardrooms, had just been bridged by this simple invitation. "I'll let you know by tomorrow," he said, pulling a napkin from his pocket and scrawling his number under her name. Samantha accepted the napkin and tucked it into her portfolio. She rose, paid for her latte at the counter with a nod to Mrs. Harris, and returned to thank Jack before heading out into the morning drizzle. He watched her go the confident stride, the trailing scent of her perfume, and for the first time that week he felt the spark of something new. Standing there, surrounded by the steady bustle of life, continuing as it always did, Jack. Donovan sensed that this modest Bronx cafe had become the starting point for a remarkable second chance, and as he sipped the last of his coffee, he realized he was leaning into a possibility far greater than he could have imagined. They settled into a vinyl booth at a tiny corner diner not far from Jack's apartment, where the neon open 24-hour sign buzzed softly against the pre-dawn sky. Samantha slid into the seat opposite Jack, who had already flagged down the waitress. Moments later, 2 warm bowls of mac and cheese arrived, the cheese, molten and golden, and 2 frosty bottles of ginger ale. He dug in first, the pasta soft against the crisp bacon bits sprinkled on top. While Samantha watched him with a thoughtful tilt of her head, Jack leaned back with his fork halfway to his mouth. "It's been a while since I had decent mac and cheese," he admitted, scooping a cheesy ribbon. Samantha took a sip of her ginger ale, sharp, sweet, and fizzy, and nodded. "Simple, but perfect," she said. He glanced at her over the rim of his fork. "So why are you here, Sammy?" "Or did I get that wrong?" he asked, eyes curious. He had called her Samantha once. Then, Ms. Blake, and now Sammy felt too familiar, yet it made her smile. "Samantha is fine," she replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I find titles can feel heavy sometimes." She scooped a bite of mac and cheese, savoring the buttery warmth. "I wanted to talk without boardroom jargon or performance reports. I thought this would be the simplest place." Jack's gaze softened. "Then let's keep it simple." He paused, swirling his ginger ale. "You asked why I'd consider the Summit gig. Truth is, I haven't been outside my comfort zone since—" He stopped, retracing his thoughts. "Since Megan died." Samantha set her bottle down, the clink of glass echoing in the quiet. "I'm sorry," she said gently, her voice unguarded. Jack nodded, eyes fixed on the tabletop. "I met her at a language exchange event. She was a cellist, classical music, 19th century sonatas, couldn't speak Spanish for her life, so we traded lessons, one phrase for one note. I'd never met anyone so alive." He pushed a stray tear back. Samantha reached across and placed her hand over his. "She sounds amazing." He smiled through the ache. She was. But she got sick glioblastoma, the kind that doesn't wait. We had 4 months. 4 months of hospital rooms scented with antiseptic and apologies for interruptions. I resigned from Hunter College that week. Couldn't stand lecterns while my life was falling apart. Samantha exhaled, her own chest tightening. My father's heart attack was sudden. I was 28 and on track to join his diplomatic team. He called me and offered me the reins of Morrow Global. He said he trusted me more than any outside candidate. She paused, eyes distant. When he died, the board balked. They wanted someone else. I had to fight for the corner office. I won, but... Her fingertips traced the wood-grain tabletop. I lost something else along the way. She stirred her mac and cheese absent-mindedly. Jack watched her CEO, strategist, negotiator, feeling the fragile humanity beneath the steel. "I don't know how you did it," he said softly. "Fought your way to the top while the world tried to push you down." She chuckled, a sound equal parts irony and gratitude. "I had to. There was no other choice. But somewhere between mergers and board votes, I forgot what it felt like to be part of something that mattered beyond profit." Jack nodded, finishing his ginger ale. Megan used to say music was the only truth in the world. Speak from the heart, not from the page. He paused, gently tapping his ring finger where Megan's wedding band had been. "I didn't understand until she was gone." Samantha leaned forward. "Tell me about your daughter." He blinked, the sudden shift pulling him back from memory's cliffs. "Lily," he said. "She's 6. Born 2 months early, 5 pounds on a good day. I'd never held a baby in an incubator before. The doctor said she might not." His voice cracked and he set his fork down. Samantha reached for both his hands. "She's a fighter," she said. "Just like her dad." His lips curved. "She is." She asked me once why helping people speak mattered so much. I told her words build bridges between hearts. She nodded, then went back to drawing rockets. Samantha's eyes misted. Rockets, huh? My niece's favorite, too. She paused. Listening to you now. I realize I've spent so long speaking in boardrooms that I forgot how to speak in living rooms. I forgot how to use my voice to comfort, not to command. Jack's voice was low but firm. You've got a hell of a voice. You should use it. Their eyes held across the table as the waitress cleared their empty bowls and offered more napkins. Steam traced the counter's edge, and somewhere a jukebox crackled to life with a blues riff. Outside, the last of the early morning crowd drifted by. Samantha smiled not just with gratitude, but with recognition. I came here to find a consultant, she said, but I think I found someone who reminds me what matters. Jack reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the worn Cruisers Express badge and the faded map with smudged pencil lines. He laid them on the table. You asked why I'd do the summit. Because Lily needs stability, yes. But I need to feel useful again, not just busy. You and we both need something real. Samantha nodded, her hand hovering over the badge. I think we both found more than a consulting gig tonight. He leaned in, voice soft but steady. A second chance. They lapsed into a companionable silence, two souls bridging disparate worlds over mac and cheese and ginger ale, vulnerability knitting them together in ways no boardroom deal ever could. Jack stood off to the side of the gleaming stage at the Grand Intercontinental Summit Hall, shoulders squared beneath his charcoal blazer. He'd arrived early that morning, earlier than he'd ever been awake for a weekday shift to run through notes on accent subtleties and cultural cues. Now, as the last keynote speaker concluded, Samantha Blake gave him a brief nod, time to step into the fire. The lights dimmed and the announcer's voice echoed, Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel of refugee entrepreneurs here to share their visions for rebuilding communities across the globe. A hush swept through the audience of executives, investors, and dignitaries as three figures appeared on stage: a Syrian woman draped in a patterned headscarf, a tall Ivorian man clutching a sleek tablet, and a soft-spoken Chinese engineer wearing a simple gray suit. Jack adjusted the discreet headset mic tucked beneath his collar. He glanced at Samantha standing just a few feet behind him and offered a small, steadying smile. She returned it with a nod that conveyed trust, not instruction. Then, stepping into the pool of light, Jack positioned himself slightly to the side so he wouldn't block the refugees, yet remained in view of the audience's monitors. The Syrian entrepreneur Amal al-Rashid cleared her throat. In Arabic, her words poured out, measured, laden with emotion, describing her vision to convert decommissioned shipping containers into mobile medical units for war-torn villages. Jack listened intently, his pen poised over his notebook. As she paused for breath, Jack's voice rose in calm English. Amal al-Rashid envisions mobile clinics built from shipping containers, bringing essential health care directly to families who have lost everything. She believes that by training local volunteers and equipping these units with solar power, they can ensure medical aid reaches remote areas day or night. A ripple of empathy spread across the audience. Jack's tone captured the gravity of Amal's loss and the fierce hope in her solution. He respected the original rhythm of her Arabic, matching its cadence in English, while preserving her dignified pauses. Next, Dr. Ivan Petrov stepped forward in Russian, his accent tinged with regret and determination. He described his initiative to create solar-powered internet hubs in remote Siberian regions, empowering children to access education and families to connect with distant relatives. Jack switched seamlessly to fluent Russian voice, softening at the plight of children trudging through snow for a single textbook, then flipped to English. For the remainder, Dr. Petrov's solar hubs will deliver connectivity to villages that have never known broadband, bridging both physical and digital distances. His goal is to foster new educational opportunities and economic partnerships, all through the power of shared knowledge. The audience leaned in. Jack sensed the room's shift, curiosity bloom into respect. He stepped back just enough to let the next speaker take prominence. Xiaoling Wu approached the podium and spoke in Mandarin about her plan to repurpose textile waste into affordable, reusable construction panels for low-income housing in China's industrial cities. Every phrase was precise, underscored by a passion for environmental sustainability and community resilience. Jack allowed her Mandarin words to hang for a moment before translating into English. Xiaoling Wu sees discarded fabrics as raw materials for change. By compressing and treating textile scraps with eco-friendly resins, her panels can be assembled into durable, energy-efficient homes. This not only reduces landfill waste, but also provides dignified shelter for factory workers and their families. He paused, letting the significant sink-in waste to home fabric to future. The audience absorbed the triad of stories united by Jack's empathetic relay. As the three entrepreneurs stepped aside, the room remained silent, the only sound the soft hum of projectors and the distant clink of glasses from the side tables. Jack felt his heart pound, not from fear but from the weight of responsibility transforming silent foreign words into resonant English truths. He exhaled slowly, then stepped away from the podium, allowing the panel moderator to guide the conversation forward. Morgan Lee, a well-known venture capitalist, took the mic. He asked the panel about funding challenges. Jack shifted back into interpreter mode, translating the moderator's question into Arabic, Russian, then Mandarin, each with respectful intonation. When the entrepreneurs answered, Jack relayed their strategic insights. Microgrants for community stakeholders, public-private partnerships for solar infrastructure, and seed funding tied to environmental impact metrics. Every nuance, every subtle shift in tone, he carried across languages with fidelity. During the Q&A, an executive from Dubai raised a hand. Amal, how will you navigate security risks in conflict zones? Jack translated the question into Arabic. Amal responded with careful candor, outlining her protocols for local liaison remote monitoring and volunteer safety training. Jack mirrored her measured restraint, ensuring that her English translation conveyed both caution and conviction. A hush followed. Jack closed his eyes briefly, feeling the gentle surge of connection, not just between speakers and listeners, but between cultures. The summit's exhibit halls, once sterile arenas for PowerPoint champions, now felt like a living forum for human futures. When the final question concluded, Jack stepped forward again. Samantha joined him on stage, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that shook benches and echoed against high ceilings. Jack felt heat rise in his cheeks, and he bowed slightly, grateful for the recognition, but reminding himself that the applause belonged to the entrepreneurs whose voices he had amplified. Samantha raised her arms, gestures concise and commanding, and thanked the audience for embracing the panel's vision. She then turned to Jack, handing him a single rose from a nearby arrangement, a token of gratitude in the midst of corporate rigor. Jack accepted it, stepping into Samantha's extended shadow as they exited the stage. Backstage, as the applause faded, Jack's legs trembled slightly. He pressed a hand to his chest where the necklace his wife had given him once nestled against his heart. Samantha appeared at his side, her expression a mixture of pride and relief. "You were phenomenal," she said quietly, voice unguarded. "You made every word matter." Jack simply nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just transpired. The summit had been his trial by fire, and his fire had forged bridges tonight. They walked through the labyrinth of black curtains and equipment cases, the chatter of technicians and assistants filling the air. Jack paused by a folding chair and sat wiping sweat from his brow. Nearby volunteers distributed bottled water and congratulated the panelists. Jack found himself smiling not from triumph, but from the raw human energy that pulsed through the building. Samantha stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "This changes everything," she said. "I've never seen our investors so energized. People aren't just talking about ROI, they're talking about impact." She glanced at him, eyes alight. "And it's all because you chose to speak their language." "Thank you." Jack lifted the rose to his nose, inhaling its subtle fragrance. "Thank you for giving me the chance," he replied softly. Samantha reached out and folded the bloom into her coat lapel, as if claiming it for both of them. "Let's go celebrate," she suggested, extending her hand. Jack took it, standing and brushing off his blazer. Together they stepped out of the backstage wings hand in hand into the summit's grand foyer, a place where just hours ago he'd been a curious observer. Now he walked beside her as an equal partner in a new narrative, their shared triumph echoing through the halls long after their footsteps had faded. The morning after the summit, Samantha walked into the glass-walled boardroom of Marrow Global Technologies. feeling the residual glow of last night's standing ovation. She'd barely slept. Her mind replayed Jack Donovan's translations, the audience's rapt attention, and the surge of genuine applause. Today, though, was about facing her board, and she steeled herself as she advanced to the head of the table. 24 executives sat stiffly in their chairs, laptops open, tablets glowing with email feeds and news alerts. Marcus Delacourt, the most vocal skeptic on her board, cleared his throat. "Ms. Blake," he began, voice cool. "We appreciate your initiative in bringing Mr. Donovan on stage last night, but as you know, some members have expressed concerns about the appearance of impropriety inviting a vendor's employee and dinner together. It's unorthodox." A ripple of murmurs followed. Samantha folded her hands calmly. "Mr. Delacourt, Mr. Donovan's contributions at the summit were demonstrably valuable. Any dinner we had was purely professional further discussion of his role." She paused, scanning the room. "But let's address these concerns directly. Jack is extraordinary at cross-cultural communication. I stand by him." Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We need more than assurances. Protocol demands due diligence. We need evidence, performance metrics, vetting of credentials." Before she could respond, the boardroom doors opened quietly, and Jack stepped in, coat still damp from a light rain. Heads turned. Some gasped at his outsider presence. Samantha rose and offered him the seat beside her. Jack gave her a firm nod of reassurance. "Board member," Samantha said, motioning toward Jack, "Mr. Donovan has offered to provide clarity on any questions you have." A few executives exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're certain this is appropriate?" "I am," Samantha replied. "Jack, the floor is yours." Jack slid into the seat Samantha had vacated, his posture relaxed but attentive. He cleared his throat gently. "Thank you. I understand there are questions about how I came to be here. I'd like to speak to the source of the recent memo leak first." He reached into his briefcase and extracted a slim USB drive. "I've worked with our IT security team to trace the breach and document circulation. The memo criticizing Summit vendor selection was altered after it left Morrow Global's central server. The secure logs point to a single terminal badge ID 1023 assigned to Marcus Delacourt." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The logs show that memo was uploaded under your credentials, then touched the restricted folder." Marcus's face paled. He closed his laptop. "That's impossible." Jack continued calmly. "The metadata confirms the timestamp. 9:14 p.m. 2 days ago during the board's last meeting. I have printouts of the logs here." He slid a folder across the table. "This isn't about me or Ms. Blake. It's about maintaining the integrity of our process." A tense silence followed. Samantha pressed a discreet button on her tablet behind the tinted glass. 2 security officers appeared at the door. Marcus stood abruptly, chair screeching, but sank back at the officer's presence. Guests turned to their screens, checking the logs Jack had supplied. One by one, heads nodded as the damning evidence became irrefutable. An older member, Kenji Watanabe, spoke with gentle authority. "I never expected Marcus to resort to sabotage. This is a breach of trust." He looked to the rest of the table. "I move we set aside any objections to Mr. Donovan's position and proceed with his appointment as head of global communications." His vote was met with hesitant agreement clicks of accept confirmations on tablets, hands raised in digital poll. Marcus, chest heaving, tried to speak but sputtered. Samantha leaned in, voice steady. "Thank you, Kenji. The board's decision is clear." She turned to Jack. "Do you accept the board's reaffirmation?" Jack nodded. "With gratitude, and I look forward to earning your trust through my work." He folded the folder and placed it in his briefcase. As the meeting adjourned, executives filed past Jack and Samantha, offering quiet apologies and nods of respect. Marcus lingered at the door, face drawn, but he said nothing. Outside, the rain had ceased and the city skyline hung bright against a gray sky. Samantha and Jack emerged into the corridor. She turned to him, relief softening her gaze. "I couldn't have asked for a stronger defense." Jack gave a modest shrug. "We did the right thing. Integrity matters." He slipped his briefcase strap over his shoulder. "And now we move forward." Samantha gave his hand a brief squeeze. "Forward," she agreed. Together they walked down the hallway toward her office, 2 people from different worlds united by trust, vindicated in the most public of arenas. Early spring found Samantha and Jack standing before a red brick building on East 147th Street, the old McKinley Branch Library, long shuttered and shuttered too quietly among neighborhood bustle. Weeds poked through cracked stone steps, and the wood-framed windows were streaked with grime and faded city posters. Yet as they pushed open the heavy oak door, a world of possibilities spilled out before them. Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light that filtered through broken panes, landing on rows of empty shelves that once held stories now waiting to be reborn. Jack inhaled the musty air. "This place has character," he said, surprised at how his voice carried in the cavernous space. Samantha nodded, eyes bright. "And it's ours to fill with new stories." They had come together to launch the Center of Voices, a hub where children, immigrants, refugees, seniors, and lifelong residents could gather, learn, and teach one another in every tongue imaginable. Their first act was to clear the main hall. Jack, armed with work gloves, and a rented broom swept decades of dust and debris into neat piles, while Samantha directed a parade of volunteers hauling out broken chairs and torn-up carpet. A local carpenter measured the old oak bookshelves and promised to refurbish them. A painter from the neighborhood pledged to cover the mottled walls in bright murals. Graffiti that once spoke of neglect, no books, here scrawled in midnight black, would soon be painted over with proverbs in Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, French, and more. La palabra es puente. Words are bridges. Yanwei Xinsheng, words are the voice of the heart. El kalima sot, the word is voice. Within days, the main reading room transformed. A mural of hands holding open a kaleidoscope of books spanned one wall. Opposite it, a mosaic of global scripts formed an archway like a welcoming rainbow. Jack and Samantha placed sturdy new tables beneath string lights, and volunteers arranged mismatched chairs, some donated by the local high school, others rescued from construction sites into conversation circles. At the center, they installed a circular rug stitched by community seamstresses, each square embroidered with a phrase in a different language. The first day of programming arrived with a gentle buzz of anticipation. Samantha unlocked the front door at 9 o'clock, and families stepped inside, blinking at the bright space. A Syrian mother cradled her toddler, whispering Arabic lullabies that echoed off the fresh paint. A teenage boy from Ecuador practiced English pronunciation with a retired teacher from Poland whose accent lent each word a kind warmth. Over by the window, an elderly woman from Puerto Rico led a Spanish book club, her laughter ringing as she teased a history buff from Ghana about the pronunciation of capital versus capital. Jack wandered through the session's notebook in hand, marveling at what he'd helped create. He paused at a corner table where 4 older men sat around a board covered in Scrabble tiles. Each word they formed switched seamlessly from Finnish to Turkish to Swahili, their eyes bright with the thrill of connection. Nearby, a group of refugee entrepreneurs, some of whom had been on Jack's summit panel, offered free workshops on bilingual business planning, their laptops glowing with slides in English and Arabic. The real magic, Samantha realized, wasn't just the languages, but the stories behind them. A young Sikh boy guided his curious classmates through the Gurmukhi script of his grandmother's sacred prayers. A Jamaican poet led a slam session where verses in patois flowed into Spanish sonnets. Everywhere, laughter mingled with translation, and every pause became an invitation to ask, "How do you say?" During the lunch hour, Samantha and Jack shared a simple meal of arepas and samosas provided by local food vendors. They ate on the refurbished reading room steps, their cheeks flushed from excitement. "I didn't know this place could feel so alive," Samantha said, eyes shining. Jack nodded, finishing his arepa. "It's like the building was waiting for us." At 2 o'clock, the official ribbon-cutting ceremony began. Community leaders, council members, and even a few former library patrons gathered at the entrance. Samantha gave a short speech, voice steady, yet brimming with emotion. The Center of Voices isn't just about language. It's about listening and understanding. Here, every word matters, every voice counts. She handed the oversized scissors to Jack, who hesitated only a moment before snipping the burgundy ribbon. Applause erupted, echoing down the reopened corridors. The celebration spilled back inside. Children raced through the aisles, their giggles weaving around the volunteers who guided them in scavenger hunts for books in unfamiliar alphabets. Jack escorted Lily, now recovered and full of mischief, through an arts and crafts corner where participants painted bookmarks decorated with their own hand-drawn rockets and rockets etched with Chinese characters. Samantha watched as the little girl waved her creation proudly, and she felt a surge of gratitude for the path that had led them here. As evening fell, the center dimmed its lights and flicked on a few lamps, creating cozy nooks where language classes continued under lantern glow. Jack and Samantha lingered by the door, watching families depart with tote bags brimming with novels, word charts, and fresh hope. A group of volunteers hugged each other goodnight, promising to return at dawn to prepare for tomorrow's poetry workshop. Jack turned to Samantha, a soft smile on his face. "We did it," he murmured. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the warm lamplight. "We did." Behind them, the center of voices stood proud, its walls alive with color, its halls echoing with laughter and conversation. It was more than a reclaimed library. It was a living testament to the power of language to heal, to teach, and to unite. And as Samantha and Jack walked away into the gentle hush of the South Bronx night, they both knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where every voice, no matter how small, could finally be heard. Saturday dawned crisp and golden, the kind of morning that seemed to promise anything was possible. Samantha pulled on her boots and wrapped a scarf around her neck before stepping into the kitchen, where the smell of brewing coffee mingled with the faint hint of maple syrup. Jack was already there, balancing Lily on his hip as he flipped pancakes on the griddle. "Easy on the batter," Samantha teased, handing him a plate. Lily, her hair in pigtails, giggled and held out a tiny spatula as if it were a trophy. "I help?" she asked, eyes bright. By mid-morning, the trio was weaving through the stalls of the South Bronx Farmers Market. Jack carried Lily on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his forehead for balance, while Samantha strolled beside them with a wicker basket looped over her arm. The market vibrated with life vendors called out over piles of ruby-red strawberries and baskets of heirloom tomatoes. The scent of fresh-baked bread drifted from one tent, mingling with the earthy perfume of honeycomb and the tang of pressed apple cider. Their first stop was the pancake booth, where a lanky teen in a flour-dusted apron served stacks of fluffy golden cakes. Jack lifted Lily down and scooped her onto a stool, her little legs dangling as she surveyed the array of toppings. Samantha ordered 3 pancakes, selecting extra maple syrup and a side of whipped cream. Lily's eyes widened when the vendor brought out a jar of wild blueberry jam. "Can I have a taste?" she asked. The vendor handed her a small wooden spoon. Lily dipped it into the jam and popped a dollop into her mouth, then grinned at Jack. "Blueberry rocket," she declared, holding up her sticky spoon. Jack laughed and wiped her chin with a napkin, smudging a smudge of blueberry across her cheek. Next, they wandered toward the honey stand, where hives of glass jars sparkled like amber jewels in the morning light. Samantha sampled a spoonful of cinnamon-infused honey, the spice warming her tongue. Jack chatted with the beekeeper about seasonal harvests, while Lily darted between jars, marveling at each one. She ran back to Jack with an impromptu crown of honeycomb shards, placing it atop his head, before someone gently suggested she might want to taste the honey instead. Jack indulged her, letting her dip her finger into a jar of creamed honey and guiding her hand back to his mouth so they could share the sweetness. They drifted past a stall laden with farm-fresh eggs, where the old farmer demonstrated how to balance an egg on its end. He invited Lily to try. She concentrated so intensely that Samantha and Jack held their breaths, then cheered when the egg teetered long enough to stand upright for a moment. Lily beamed, then hopped down to give the farmer a high five, her small hand sticky with yolk. Their basket began to fill a loaf of country sourdough, a wedge of sheep's milk cheese wrapped in wax paper jars of peach preserves and tangy cherry jam. Samantha paused by a stall selling fresh flowers and picked up a bunch of daffodils. "For the kitchen," she said, breathing in their bright scent. Jack offered to carry them, but Samantha tucked them into her jacket, the yellow blooms peeking above her pocket like the first signs of spring. They made their way to a corner where a group of musicians had set up 2 guitarists and a violinist. The melody drifted through the market, soft and lilting, a perfect soundtrack for their morning. Lily tapped her foot in rhythm and then began to dance, her pigtails bouncing. Samantha filmed her daughter on her phone, and Jack watched with the quiet pride of a parent who knows this is exactly where he wants to be. As the market wound down, they found a sunlit patch of sidewalk near the entrance and spread out a checkered blanket. Jack unpacked the treasure's cheese and bread for Samantha, jam-topped pancakes for Lily, an extra bottle of ginger ale for himself. They shared the meal in companionable silence, only the murmur of departing vendors and the distant hum of the city for company. Samantha dipped a piece of bread into the cheese and passed it to Jack. "Perfect pairing," she said. He smiled and replied, "Only the best for my team." Lily, her face animated with that sticky-cheeked innocence only a child can carry, offered each of them a taste of her peach-preserved pink rocket jam, she called it. They took turns licking the spoons she offered each bite, eliciting exaggerated expressions of delight. A couple passing by stopped to watch, and Samantha caught Jack's eye. In that glance, they shared the same thought. This was the kind of happiness that didn't need a boardroom or summit. It needed only pancakes, jam, and each other. When the sun climbed higher, they packed up their basket and headed home. Lily perched happily on Jack's hip. Samantha carried the blanket, its corners drifting in the breeze, like a promise of many more mornings just like this. As they turned the corner toward their street, Lily stretched out her arms and asked, "Again next weekend?" Jack and Samantha exchanged a knowing smile. "Absolutely," Jack said, tucking her closer. Samantha reached for his hand, weaving their fingers together. And in that simple gesture, three souls forging a new rhythm against the city's relentless pace, they stitched together a tapestry of hope, belonging, and the gentle magic of rituals made sacred by love. Late spring air settled over the city as Jack stepped onto the rooftop terrace of Samantha's penthouse, the hum of traffic softened by distance, and the gentle glow of string lights overhead. The bulbs suspended on slender wires cast pools of warm light across the wooden planks beneath their feet. Below the skyline shimmered glass towers reflecting the last rays of sunset church steeples, standing sentinel over winding streets, the city's pulse visible in each illuminated window. Samantha was already there, seated on a plush outdoor love seat, two steaming mugs of chamomile tea resting on the low table in front of her. Jack paused a moment, savoring the hush. Nothing about this evening required anything more spectacular. No orchestrated speeches, no grand gestures. Here, high above the streets, all that mattered was being present two people who had weathered storms of loss of doubt, of corporate scrutiny, now carving out a simple moment of calm together. He crossed the terrace and sank beside Samantha, who offered him his tea without a word. He took a slow sip, the floral warmth unfurling in his chest like a balm. She watched him, the soft light catching in her eyes, and Jack felt the steady thrum of connection that had grown between them, an unspoken language of steadiness and understanding. He reached out, brushing his thumb along the back of her hand. Her fingers curved around his, their palms settling together in a perfect fit. In this small clasp, they had found a promise deeper than any honeymoon vow or corporate alliance. It was the promise of presence, the decision to stay, come what may. They sat in silence, watching the city transform from twilight to night. A breeze teased strands of Samantha's hair across her cheeks. Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders to catch them, then drew her hand closer to rest on his knee. Together they watched a plane trace a thin slash of light across the indigo sky. Passengers likely unaware of the intimate peace unfolding below. "Remember when we first met?" Samantha's voice was low, almost lost in the night air. "I had no idea what I was missing." Jack smiled, his thumb still brushing her skin. "I almost walked past you." He remembered the hotel lobby haze, the blur of suited tourists, and then the clarity when he first saw her watching him untangle that overwhelmed tour group. "I'm glad you didn't." She turned to him, chin-tilted vulnerability flickering behind her composure. "I wasn't looking for this." Her lips softened, "but I found it anyway." He traced her cheek with his fingertips, memorizing the curve of her jaw and the gentle light. Leadership and love. He began searching for the right phrasing. They're not about grandstanding. They're about being here even when it's hard. Samantha leaned into his touch. "You taught me that." She paused, and Jack could almost feel the weight of her words, the lesson learned when he'd stood beside her in the boardroom, defending her from whispers and sabotage. The lesson learned in that abandoned library that transformed Community Hub, where they both found voices they thought they'd lost. Jack closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of chamomile and jasmine that drifted up from the planters behind them. "I used to think leadership was about having the loudest voice, the clearest plan. But then I saw you step into silence and choose integrity over optics. That was stronger than any press release. Samantha's gaze softened and she reached to tuck a lock of hair behind his ear. And you, she said, voice catching, you spoke truth when nobody else would. You didn't rescue me, you reminded me who I was. He tilted his head, surprised at the depth of her gratitude. I was just present. She gave him a small laugh, a sound like wind chimes stirring. Being present is the hardest thing some people can do. Jack smiled, brushing her hand with his lips. Then I'm glad we're both here. A gentle moment passed, two hearts beating in unison against the distant roar of the city. Samantha rested her head on his shoulder, and Jack leaned his cheek against her hair. Their tea grew cooler on the table, steam curling into the night like a farewell. I don't need fireworks, Samantha whispered. Not when I have this. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Not when I have you. She straightened slightly, gazing out at the skyline with him in that embrace. Promise we'll keep this? She murmured, the simplicity of her request more profound than any marital vow. Promise we'll stay here together no matter how loud the world gets. Jack's heart tightened with both joy and solemnity. He tightened his grip on her hand, sealing the promise. I promise, he said, voice firm. I'll be here. They remained like that until the stars emerged one by one, scattering across the sky. The humid night deepened and the city lights flickered in endless constellations below. They spoke of nothing and everything, of Lily's new drawings, of center expansion plans, of futures both planned and yet unknown. Their whispers drifted into the night, gentle ripples in the vast expanse of the world. When at last they rose to leave, carefully setting the chipped mugs aside, they lingered at the terrace door. Samantha tucked her coat tighter around her and Jack brushed a hand across her back. They paused, silhouettes against the urban panorama, and Jack pulled her close for a final embrace under the string lights, their warmth a soft beacon in the cool night air. No declarations were needed. In that shared silence, with hands still intertwined, they had spoken a lifetime of truth, that leadership and love and all the strength needed to weather life's storms begin with steadfast presence. And as they stepped back inside, leaving the glow of the rooftop behind, they carried that promise with them, an unbreakable bond forged in the quiet glow of simple devotion.